Welcome back to the Goku Report, and this is a special new top 10 list looking back at 5 of the greatest slasher films to check out. Given we are now just over a week out from Halloween, I think it's only suitable time to discuss a few slasher film recommendations I have. Depending on what your cup of tea is slasher wise, if you appreciate slasher films in general. Looking at some slasher films from the 80s, the 90s, and even into the 2000s. But as thing, top 5 slasher films I recommend checking out. First up, couple recommendations or honorable mentions, if you will. First, Scream 4. My Soul to Take. Also, of other slasher films that I do recommend somewhat for their interesting takes, Nightmare on Elm Street 3, Dream Warriors. And the last honorable mention, which is definitely one of the more interesting ones, I would go with. Technically, it's not really a traditional slasher film per se, but I give an honorable mention for its uniqueness, and that is Halloween 3 Season of the Witch. Criminally underrated movie, I might add. Coming in at number 5 is more of an action slasher film, per se, you could say, but it was a very unique crossover that I think was done actually pretty well. Coming at number 5 of slasher films I recommend checking out is Freddy vs. Jason, which was really the first major versus clash, and about the only versus I think that was somewhat done actually decent. And now, I will say, if you watch this movie, if you don't, at least okay, don't mind nu metal, you're not gonna like the soundtrack to this film. It does have some nice, at the beginning, eeriness mixing the themes of Nightmare on Elm Street with Friday the 13th. Perfect blend, but just know this, that there's a lot of nu metal, so just be ready. It was like 2003 after all. Personally, I still really enjoy it. It's probably my second favorite Freddy film, I would say personally. Coming in at number 4 is arguably, in my opinion, about maybe the most iconic horror film of the 1990s, originally, anyways, and also involved the workings of definitely some familiar faces at the time. Um, One at the time, a young actress we would know only from around the time had done so far season 1 of Buffy. It's sad that she didn't play such a good character. It was kind of douchey, to say the least. Overall, pretty good film, and I have a nostalgia factor attachment for it. Coming at number 4, though, I recommend slasher films is I Know What You Did Last Summer. It's a classic 90s slasher film, in my personal opinion. Coming in at number 3 is definitely gonna be one that is subjective to opinion. I would say, for me personally, number 3 is, in my opinion, maybe the most underrated slasher film. It was genuinely intelligent and smart the way it was done. Personally, for me though, number 3 favorite slasher film of all time would go to New Nightmare. Arguably, in general, of the solo, it's easily my second favorite Nightmare on Elm Street, favorite Krueger film. Definitely, it was much more serious tone and stuff. It was a unique concept. Really, had it not been for the creation of New Nightmare from Wes Craven, we probably would have gotten about 2 years later a great film called Scream, also by Wes Craven. But really, New Nightmare paved the way for Scream. Coming in at number 2 is a tie. I couldn't choose, so for second place is a tie between the original classic Scream, which is an all-time classic and really went into the meta side of things. It's very interesting to say the least, I will say that. The original Scream is an all-time classic, and I don't think anyone will ever be able to touch it. But it definitely has gotten a lot of praise over the years. I think maybe at sometimes, maybe to a certain point, I would consider a bit overrated, where I think New Nightmare is criminally underrated. But with that said, tied at number 2 with Scream is another classic from, of course, certain individuals like Wes Craven and others involved at one time or another with the series. Tied with it is the original classic Friday the 13th, which, by the way, did not have Jason in it. The original classic didn't really have Jason. Really, it wouldn't be until really Friday the 13th 3 that we would get the traditional known hockey mask Jason Voorhees. Until then, in the first film, it was actually Mrs. Voorhees, Jason's mother, which had very justified reasons why she would kill the campers. And I still think that the original Friday the 13th is an all-time classic, not just slasher film, but classic horror film in general, and I will always praise the original film for really pushing the boundaries and paved the way for many other slasher films. Though, there could arguably be, I'll quickly give an honorable mention to a film that could be considered a precursor to pretty much slasher in general, and that would be a film released in 1960. I give an honorable mention to the great film, of course, from the great Alfred Hitchcock, of course, Psycho. Really paved the way for most slasher films of the 70s and 80s. Now, with that said, coming in at number 1, should not be a surprise, it's my number 1 favorite slasher film of all time. It is arguably in probably my top 3 favorite horror films of all time. And that is the original classic released in 1980, the same year I was actually born, interestingly enough, would be the year that this film would be released. And the same year is also Dragon Ball and Transformers would start. But with that said, the original classic Nightmare on Elm Street comes in at number 1. Because in general, when worst comes to worst, even though most of the sequels of Freddy, outside of maybe New Nightmare reinventing things, and really enjoying actually also the third film quite a bit too. The first one always remains untouchable in my opinion. It really paved the way. It really helped the career of Robert Englund as well. His career definitely, unfortunately, it is the main role he will forever be known as is Freddy Krueger. And I think that good reason. He has definitely become, arguably, in my opinion, the most iconic slasher. Now, other people will argue either Jason Voorhees or Michael Myers is the most iconic. I see where you're coming from. I was never, outside of Season of the Witch, I was never the biggest fan of the Halloween series. Outside of that, maybe H2O. But with that said, that is just my opinion. I grew up really into those, and I'll admit I also have kind of a guilty pleasure for another 90s series of films called Wishmaster, which is something I might touch about or talk about in the future sometime. Also involve, of course, Robert Englund happens to be featured in the first Wishmaster film, as is the one of the actors who played Jason Voorhees. It's very interesting, to say the least. But with that said, that is my recommendations of 5 of, in my opinion, of the greatest slasher films of all time to check out. Now, if you want something a little more gruesome or something, I would say go back to Semley's if you're at all interested. Check out the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre if you're interested, and that kind of stuff. If you're into the really gruesome stuff, that or Saw, but for me, I'm not as big into that kind of stuff. I prefer still stuff at a little bit more psychological level or better suspense. That's why I like Friday the 13th, is more for suspense and the cheesiness. And I like more the eeriness, creep factor, though over time he would become more for bad puns and jokes and stuff. But I still have always loved Freddy Krueger, Jason Voorhees, as well as, of course, other characters. But with that said, sometime in the future, I might look at, in my opinion, maybe 5 of the worst slasher films of all time, At least from my perspective in any case. But with that said, see y'all next time, and let me know in the future sometime if you'd like me to do a list of maybe 5 horror films that I recommend that are not rated R, like PG/PG-13, more family-friendly horror films, if you can have such a thing as a family-friendly horror film. But with that said, I'll see y'all next time and have a good upcoming Halloween All Hallows Eve. Day of the Dead, wherever you live in the world. With that said, see you soon. Hopefully, enjoy the dark piano music in the background it shows. But with that said, I'll see you soon enough.